Hey there, it's time for more geography. Geography of Europe. With Europe, the chapter I want you to read to begin with deals with what? It deals with the physical geography of Europe. And the physical geography, I like to think of first the landforms, the water systems, and the climate. Those are three big divisions, the ground cover as well. Okay, but let's think about the physical geography a little bit of Europe. And to start out with, when you're in Europe, you're never far away from mountains or the ocean. That's a given right there. There's either hills, mountains, or water, or big rivers like the Rhine River, the Rhone River, the Vistula River, the Thames. All these rivers. What are we forgetting? There's so many big rivers in Europe as well. The Elbe, the Labe, the Vltava. All these rivers of Europe. Okay. So how can we make sense out of it? How can we group it together? Well, in Europe, you're going to find it breaks down into threes quite often, the number three. Okay? So when we talk about physical landforms, and if we talk about mountain systems, first of all, three major mountain systems. Okay? The first is going to be the Alpine system. And the Alpine system, or the Alps, cuts across the middle of Europe. It's a division north to south in many ways culturally. Okay, but you have the Alps, of course, dominating Switzerland. They're in France. They're in Germany a little bit. They also are in much of Austria, little countries like Liechtenstein as well, and over into Slovenia, northern Italy. This is the Alpine mountain system, and the Alps are pretty good size. I mean, everyone's seen the snow-covered Alps of Switzerland. Okay, so that's one major mountain group. The second major mountain group, I said there's going to be three. The second one is the Carpathians. Now, the Carpathians are probably lesser known to most of you. Maybe, like me, you have some ancestors who came from the Carpathians. The Carpathians run from Vienna, Austria, outside of Vienna, actually, a little corner of the Czech Republic, and through Slovakia. A lot of Slovakia is part of the Carpathians, into Ukraine. That way, we have the Carpathians, and they form a big arch, sort of like a horseshoe. Again, look at a map. Get used to looking at maps. And the Carpathians come down through Romania, and a good portion of Romania are the Carpathian Mountains. Now, like all mountain ranges, there's different names within them. Okay, if we look at the Appalachians in the United States, we know that parts of the Appalachians we call what? Well, if you're far up north, we might look at the Catskill Ranges. We may look at the Smoky Mountains of the Carolinas. This is all part of the larger Appalachian chain, okay, in the United States. The same with the Alps, the same with the Carpathians. These are the bigger groups of mountains, and they're divided up sometimes locally by different names, okay? But you have, again, the Alps, you have the Carpathians, and the third group we're going to generalize and call the Southern Mountains. And the Southern Mountains are going to be all of the hills and plateaus of Spain, the Pyrenees Mountains, the Apennine Mountains of Italy, the Dinaric Mountains or Dinarics of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, where's that? Well, it's a country that's broken up now into several new countries. The Dinarics are in Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, and they run down into Greece. We can go that way. It's part of the Balkan system. The Balkan Mountains themselves are in Bulgaria. Okay, and when we get into Turkey, is Turkey part of Europe? Well, that's a question. But we see mountains, and this is all across the Mediterranean world, so that's sort of the third group. First, we have the Alps across Central Europe. We have the Carpathians across East Central Europe and into Ukraine, Romania, Slovakia. And we have the southern group, which is a whole mixture and very complex geology of mountains in the south. Okay, so those are the three mountain systems. If we go to the British Isles, we have the Highlands. We talk about the Welsh Highlands, the Scottish Highlands, the Highlands of Ireland. Ireland's sort of like a bowl. The Highlands are around the rim of it, and it's sort of low in the center. London is on the English Plain, and the further away from London you go, the more highlands you find. Okay, that's one thing about the British Isles. Scandinavia, you're going to have the volcanic mountains of where? Iceland. Iceland is volcanic, and when we go up into Scandinavia, Norway and Sweden, we're going to have the Kjolen or Scandinavian mountains right down the center of those two countries. Denmark is not mountainous at all. Okay, Denmark and Poland and the Baltics, northern Germany is a glacial plain, just like the Midwest here in the U.S. Okay, so that's a little about the mountains. What about the climates of Europe? We look at climates again. Let's think about big three groups of climates. Marine West Coast. We have a little corner of it in the United States in the Pacific Northwest. I made a video about that. I'm going to make you watch that one too. Okay, it's foggy. It's influenced and modified by the ocean water. The temperatures of the ocean have a big effect. And in Europe, it's pretty significant because Europe is really much further north than the United States. And when we look at the modification of the climate by the Gulf Stream current and the marine West Coast climate, it's much warmer than it should be as far north as it is. And it stretches pretty far inland, the marine West Coast climate. That's one climate group. The second climate group, well, you got the coastal climate group, then you got the continental. Okay, and we often label it humid continental. Okay, because there's moisture throughout the year. There's rainfall or snow, precipitation throughout the year. We in Indiana, northern Indiana, most of the Midwest, is in a humid continental climate. The coldest place in the 48 states is where usually? Not Seattle, not the Northwest, but in the middle of the country, Minnesota. International Falls for all you people from Minnesota, right? Why does it have the coldest winters? Because it's the furthest from the oceans on either side. So you have a continental climate. Okay, the oceans are not going to modify it. And the oceans are not going to make it a little warmer in the winter and a little cooler in the summer. No, you're going to have extremes when you're in Minnesota. Okay, because it's a pure continental climate with little modification by the oceans. It's simple thermodynamics of heating and cooling, bodies of water, liquids as opposed to solids. What holds the heat, what distributes the heat, things like this. Okay, so continental climate in Europe is the second big one, and that's going to start about the middle of Europe and go east. Think about Russia. As you get into Russia, you're further away from the oceans and seas, and you're going to have more extremes. You're going to have a short, hot summer, just like Minnesota, and you're going to have an extremely cold Russian winter. It's part of their culture, the Russian winter. It's in all their novels and fiction and stories they write. It's character number 3 always is the Russian winter. Okay? So we have, again, marine West Coast climate, continental climate that's going to be much more seasonal and harsher as we get into about the middle of Europe and go east. And then in the south, what do we have? Well, it's called a Mediterranean climate, and that's the name of it. That's the type of it, what's labeled. We have a Mediterranean climate in Southern California. From Los Angeles south, San Diego is probably the best example of a Mediterranean climate. Cape Town, South Africa, also has a Mediterranean climate. People think this is a really nice climate because they got mild winters and dry summers. Okay, and ancient empires thrived in Europe in the Mediterranean. The Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians, all these other people, the Carthaginians, the Mediterranean world, and it means the middle of the earth, Mediterranean. This was the center of the ancient world. The Roman Empire included all of North Africa and the Middle East as well. And this was the center of everything. And part of it was that wonderful climate, Mediterranean climate, that we find in Spain, that we find in Italy, that we find in Greece, that we find in neighboring countries as well, all the way to the Middle East and parts of North Africa. Okay, so those are the 3 big climate groups of Europe. Just look at a map. Mediterranean climate, continental climate, and maritime climates. Okay, those 3. There's outliers, there's extremes. And whenever we're in the high mountains, we get orographic precipitation and lifting where you're going to have moist air forced up high. It's going to have rainfall. You're going to have snow in the mountains. And the higher up you go, you're getting closer to the sun, so it gets hotter, right? No, the opposite. It's going to get colder the higher you get up. Think about flying. If you're 30,000 feet up, what's the temperature outside? It's pretty cold. Okay. The same with mountains. When you go up higher, temperature drops about 3 degrees Fahrenheit every 1,000 feet. Okay, so if you go up 10,000 feet in elevation in a mountain, it's going to be about 30 degrees colder in general. That's a rule of thumb you can use right there. That's the adiabatic lapse rate. You can read about that as well with climates. So that's a little bit of an introduction to climates and physical geography of Europe. Fill in all the gaps by reading about it in the textbook. And I'm going to ask you some questions about the readings on our discussions, our dialogues, whatever that may be. Okay, so physical geography, climate, landforms, water systems. There's a lot of seas around Europe, a lot of different ones, waterways. The power of European countries in the last several hundred years was through naval power, building great naval forces that conquered much of the world. The Portuguese, the Dutch. Portugal is probably the poorest country of Western Europe now, but at one time it was a powerful force, and great explorers went around the world from Portugal before anyone else. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, the Dutch people, the British, the French. What do they have in common? They're all on the Atlantic Ocean. They all have access to the open waters of the Atlantic. They all built great navies. They all colonized much of the world. The people of the heartland of Europe did not. The Germans, the Poles, the Czechs, the Hungarians, the Swiss, they did not have open access to the Atlantic. They did not build up great naval powers and colonize the rest of the world. So there's a lot of things about history that are related to land, landforms, access to water. The Russians didn't have access to the Atlantic either, so what did they do? Russia used to be a smaller place. It used to be around Kiev and Moscow. That was the Russian Empire 1,000 years ago. That was it. In the 1500s, I believe it was, under Ivan the Great, Tsar Ivan the Great, they started an expansion where? East. Because they couldn't go west, so they went east. They colonized all of North Asia. They made this great Russian Empire, and they kept going all the way to the Pacific Ocean, just like we did in the United States. And Alaska was part of their empire. We bought it from Russia in 1867. Seward bought that, Secretary of State. And, so every bit of history, when you look at history, you got to think of the geography. You got to look at access to waters, location, mountains, seas, oceans, climates. Why did the Germans have such a hard time fighting the Russians in World War II? A big part of that was the climate. Napoleon had the same problem when he went into Russia. I think he was defeated not just by the massive Russian army, but by the Russian winter that nobody could handle. Okay, so all these factors make up civilizations and impact civilizations. I think that's it for now. I've gone over my 10 minutes, but that's my intro lecture there on the physical geography of Europe. All right, see you later. Bye.